This is Eric Rattan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
Thanks so much for tuning into the show, because I've got a conversation with a fella who comprises one half of the duo in Capital. His name is Nick Jenkin, and he's actually featured on the podcast before, way back in 2018, when they launched Human Is, an album that would go on to make my best of year-end list. Maybe the catalyst for this chat will go on and do the same thing in 2021. It's another album, and it's titled Fridays with Carol. So of course we talk all about the album and a heap of other worthy topics. And before we dive into the chat, let's have a listen to a tune called Dr. Man's Disco Plan. Once that's done, you'll hear us talk. Let's go. Good, mate. Good. What's been happening? It's been a couple of years, I think, since our last chat. It only feels like last week, but it has been about 3 years.
It has been. A lot's been happening. I'm actually, the location, I'm sitting in my car actually in, where am I? I'm in Carnarvon at the moment in WA.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Gosh, yeah, nice part of the world, but you can't get in or out of WA like it's the same here actually in Queensland.
Yeah, we, myself and my partner, we left Melbourne probably about 3 months ago. And so we've been travelling up through South Australia, the NT, now WA. Basically, it feels like COVID's been chasing us all throughout those places. But we were very lucky where we got out when we could, because we just had one too many lockdowns last year in Melbourne, and so now we're kind of enjoying the life on the road. So, yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Oh, it's psychotic in Melbourne. There's no two ways about it. It's inhumane what's going on. This COVID zero thing that bastard's been chasing now for over 2 years. It's about 2 years now. Was never gonna fly, and it flies in the face of the scientific facts about the virus, or the pandemic, and this bloody thing that we're all living through. It's just totalitarianism. It's nuts.
Yeah, I think last year, I think it was okay. Like because of it wasn't particularly contagious compared to this particular strain. But at this stage, I think he's been a bit reactive. The kind of New South Wales gave a bit of a plan for how they were going to come out of lockdown, where they've been a bit reactive this time, and it sounds like they've started to change their tune a bit. So hopefully everyone back home can get some relative freedom soon enough. And then, by the time we might head back at around Christmas time if we're allowed to, because we've got family in Victoria and New South Wales. And it'd be nice to spend time with them. But we are some of the lucky ones. There's a lot of people on the road, and we're some of the lucky ones. So it's very cool.
Are you meeting a lot of people from Melbourne on the road, are you?
There's definitely a lot of people from Victoria. But I would say now that we're in WA, it feels like a lot of people from WA are on the move. Like I'm sitting in a caravan park at the moment. I can see number plates from all over Australia, but the majority are WA. I would say there was a lot more people in the Northern Territory that were from all over the shop. It's a mix of like, even there's still some backpackers here because they're on the move, probably trying to get away from COVID. And then there's the grey nomads, which are awesome to hang out with. And then there's maybe peeps like us that have taken 6 months off work to travel, that maybe don't have the same obligations and kind of things to take care of, because I think you got kids, don't you, Andy?
Yeah, I got two kids, so mortgages. There's no way I could do what you're doing. Yeah, just wouldn't.
Yeah, well, I got the mortgage back home, so there's a finite amount of time which we can take off. But we stockpiled some funds, and we don't have to send kids to school and buy school uniforms just yet. But I can feel for you guys being parents.
Yeah, it's look, honestly, it's because we've become a bit of a hermit kingdom here in Queensland, a bit like what WA's done. I've got to say, for the most part, you don't notice it, because as soon as there's a case, they just lock the border. And that's why the borders are still shut. And we've had bugger all lockdowns, I've got to say. Like, realistically, I couldn't even tell you when the lockdowns we've had have occurred. But I'm just very aware of what people in Sydney, and particularly mainly Melbourne, have gone through. Because as you probably well know, Melbourne is the music capital of Australia. So the vast majority of musicians I speak to originate from Melbourne. And man, it's just had a suffocating effect on industry, the whole thing. And there's this shadow pandemic going on right now with youth suicides and with depression and people calling Lifeline and all that sort of stuff spiking, alcohol abuse, drug abuse. Mate, there's all these side effects that will never be considered as they'll never be considered from a political perspective as an irrational consequence of these economic, because they're really economic lockdowns. That's what they are, because they stop people from getting out and participating in the economy, the machinations of capitalism. That's what it's about, really. I mean, you get together with people because you want to sort of share a beverage or have a meal or something like that. That's what you do. You don't sort of go over to someone's house to read Proust, if you know what I'm saying. It's not wrong. Maybe some people do, but very few. But it's just, I mean, Melbourne is right now, outside, I heard a statistic outside of some city in Brazil, or maybe the whole nation of Brazil, Melbourne is the most locked down city in the world.
Yeah, I think it was Buenos Aires in Argentina.
Buenos Aires, was it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think they were originally, but now Melbourne's taken over with the collective. And I'm speaking to friends back home, and they're doing it tough, especially as you've mentioned, the people in the creative industry, which have had no support for a long time, especially within live music. Often see posts from the dude at Cherry Bar kind of pleading with his wider audience and, the government to kind of back them up a bit. And they have just announced, maybe in about the last few days, an arts grant, I think, that is basically applied through Music Victoria. An amount of funding has been approved.
Yeah.
But like any grant, there's always qualifications to it. So I don't know the exact details, but yeah, there's a lot of my mates back home that, especially within the creative industries, and some of them have been lucky to be able to get work, but others, like especially as you say in the live music industry, that are really struggling.
Mate, let's talk about your music now, because far more positive subject. I am enjoying this release here, Fridays with Carol. I think you've picked up where you left off with Human Is. But let's go back to 2018 for a moment and just refresh ourselves as to the comments that I made in my year-end list, because the album did actually make my year-end list in that year. So I said that during a conversation with yourself, I mentioned that Daniel Johns from Silverchair should give you a call. And this was in light of the appalling material that Daniel Johns was releasing under the Dreams moniker with the very overrated Luke Steele from Sleepy Jackson. And it's obvious from the many strengths of Human Is that you could easily do that. Enough said. So I think what you've conjured on Fridays with Carol, the new album, this year, it builds on, as I say, what you did with Human Is, but it takes on a few new twists as well, which I enjoyed actually. So you've added driving synths, which is what he hinted at on Human Is. You've got wah wah knee style uptown funk on the tune Roland Garros. I love that. You can see my basses here. I play some wah wah knee in my cover band. Sugar Free. Remember that tune? Get a bit of that stuff down. And some choice B50. Yeah, I mean, it's all there. It's a bit of Paul Gray, and some choice B52 style sort of vocal trade-offs there with Dr. Man's Disco Plan with its nice slinky bass groove. And elsewhere, you've got, I think what your trademark is, that reverb-heavy tom hit through everything. I like the way you guys do that. I think it complements your music quite well. So, look, they're my observations. For starters, do you agree with my observations, and what else do you want to add?
Well, I love the observations. I especially love the B-52's observations, because that particular track, and just going back to Human Is, you were very kind on that release, and
No worries.
we really appreciated that. That's putting us in your top 10 for 2018. We're very chuffed by that. But yeah, I think that the B-52's reference, all the references sound on point. You know, it's all in the ear of the listener. But I think in terms of this release, it was kind of, you know, we wanted that core sound, but I think you'll notice that some of the tracks these days have probably got less. They're probably less in length. Like the average on the last release was probably 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah. So it's probably trying to wrap them in a bow of an accessible, synth-driven, but with heavy guitars in some songs. You know, essentially poppier versions. So, you know, in realms of The Cure, maybe War on Drugs a little bit, some Tears for Fears in there. But yeah, you know, going to these emotional places, but then kind of not taking yourself too seriously on some of the tracks, like, you know, Dr. Man's Disco Plan, the B-52's referenced Roland Garros, which maybe has a little bit of Prince in it, hopefully, if people hear that. But yeah.
Yeah, I can hear that. I can definitely hear the Prince side of it. I guess, to be honest with you, I don't like Prince that much. So Y1E I do like a lot. So I wasn't going to reference it as someone I didn't like, but I can hear you. I can hear it. Yeah, I just think Prince has been a bit just overrated. I just don't understand why it's so rated so highly, you know. And
well, I could understand that. I think I guess some of the music we're making is kind of 80s inspired synth pop. So it's kind of, when it goes to a Prince place, it's not something that Cam and I specifically listen to, but I guess we respect him formerly as a musician. And, you know, stuff like when you see him perform at the Super Bowl and he's shredding guitar solos, or that purple guitar, very flamboyant. He's got his own thing going on, and he's an amazing musician and performer. But I can understand how it's not for everybody. But again, the reference to Uptown Funk, Mark Ronson, you know, that is a pretty accurate reference. Not something that we tried to, and maybe a song that we really maybe gravitated towards, but it's kind of one of those earworms that gets inside your ear, and you can't help but listen to it every now and again.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, killer. Yeah. Were there any, you kind of hinted at this, but were there any techniques or styles that you consciously added this time around? For example, did you bring in a guitarist to complete some cuts that you were aiming for a particular sound and you needed some technical skills that the guitarist had, and vis-a-vis with the drummer?
Yes and no. In terms of the guitarist, that would be me. And so all the guitar you hear on there is my playing. But I would say the guitar took the back seat to this release, whereas in Human Is, it was kind of a little bit more out the front. There are songs that have clear lead guitar parts in them, like Through the Night is kind of like this 3 or 4 minute, maybe War on Drugs meets, I don't know, U2-esque journey, and then it goes into a big guitar lead sound, and then the drums kick in and whatnot. But a place that I'm lacking in from a musician point of view is probably drums. I can play them okay, but we drafted in for our song Bell Jar, which was, you know, kind of the song that we didn't put any ceilings on. It has the big triple stack guitars left and right. It had, you know, the big distortion guitars in it. The classic LA metal Ibanez pedal gets used on that one. You know, the big sky reverb on that one. You know, it was kind of like I went on this musical odyssey through the States, and I needed a memento after some of the songs that were written on the album musically were kind of when I've been through something that, caused me to go and consult a doctor about a mental health plan, kind of throwing back into what you were talking about. A lot of people that are probably struggling right now with what's going on in half the country. And I've been through that and came back from some time away and just thought I need to get myself right and check myself into a mental health care plan. But then after that, spent some time in the States and did this musical odyssey through like Seattle to see, the grunge movement, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, then down through like Nashville, Memphis, down to New Orleans and just soaking in the country, then going to Asheville where the Moog synth place is, and then up to New York, which is a massive music capital as well. But the memento from there was to bring back a Gretsch. I think it was a duo jet. And so I spent a bit of money at Rudy's in New York, the guitar shop. Yeah. So that guitar sound kind of defined the sound of this album from a guitar point of view, because it meant that I was using a completely different guitar to our last release. And so I guess that's kind of bled into the sound a bit. But yeah, in terms of the other musicians, we actually had, a couple of guys like Brody who helped us out on drums. We had our friend Piers who played saxophone on 2 tracks. We had my mate formerly played for the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra on cello on 2 tracks.
Nice.
So there's a lot of diversity in the sound, and I think we're very thankful that we have some amazing musicians around us that we can employ and kind of, they help us out, and, it just kind of takes the sound to another level.
Yeah, indeed. It's nice having access to people who know exactly what they're doing. And when you're talking about drafting in these people to add to your tunes, do you give them any instructions, or do you just say, hey, I want a cello party, go for it?
Part of this release was, I guess from a saxophone point of view, it was kind of trusting in the musician that we knew, Piers. He's an amazing musician, and we give him a guide and say, this is the section, this is what's there, but just go to the place where you think this song should go to. So it became more of a performance. Part of the cello was a little bit different, where we had very specific parts that I'd written, and then I transposed it from like MIDI terminology into like sheet music that he could play, because he's, his sight reads anything. He's amazing. And then the drummer, Brody, was more of just a feel thing. It was saying, we tried a couple of drummers and they didn't quite work out. They weren't really the performer we were after. And then we went to Brody and kind of said, this is what we need and this is what we're after. So we sat down and kind of went through it. And then I kind of talked him through what we're after. And then he just nailed it. So probably a bit of both, I would say, performance-based, because it's probably in line with a lot of the album. We kind of forewent or foregoed technical proficiency for a performance. So a lot of Cam's vocals on the albums are pretty amazing performances from my point of view, where we actually just, our modus operandi is to go to country towns and hire out a house and just plonk our recording gear in the middle of the biggest room and just record. So over the years, like I've acquired enough gear, as you would know, as a musician, that you just continually acquire gear. And so over the years, acquired all the recording equipment that we needed. And there was something else that, on this release, we felt kind of we needed to step up from the last one in terms of the production. I wasn't particularly happy, leaving the production where it was on the last one. I wanted to take it up a notch. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the production's killer, by the way. Yeah, it's great. It's great. And I was going to ask you about, I will ask you about the choice of instruments and synths. You sort of touched on it again there, but did you, you talk about acquiring different instruments and then being able to use them, and did you Is this an album where when you're putting the songs together, you were thinking, I've got this Moog or whatever it might be, it's going to go great in this part here? Were you doing that? Were you actually writing parts with an instrument or a synth in mind?
Not really. I would say it's kind of fluid. We just go to it. It's a lot of trial and error. Basically, just go through. I mean, I acquired the Holy Trinity of Trinity, or like the awesome foursome of 80s synths. Yamaha DX7. I already had a Roland Juno 6. I had acquired the Roland D50 and the Korg M1, which is more of a 90s kind of late 80s synth. So they're kind of period-specific stuff. But this channel on YouTube, Dr. Mix, is just this crazy, I think he's Italian, synth dude who just goes through like gear talks and everything. And one of them was like these 4 synths. And so I thought I had to grab those. But specifically, it was more about what does the music need. And it probably starts out with like maybe a synth line, or maybe it'll start out with a guitar lick, and then you just start building it from there. So it's not, that you go to a particular one. You probably have a preset on one. You go, that would sound really cool in this song. So it's probably more based on the sound rather than the actual synth itself.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, it's interesting. You can see my bases here. I definitely pick things based on their sound. Well, I mean, I'm playing covers. It's a bit of a different scenario there, but a lot of the 5-string sub stuff that I like to do, the Kylie songs, the Olivia Newton-John stuff, all the stuff I've got to do for pack music halls and stuff. But I want a darker sound. That's my Stingray. When I'm a bit busier, it's the Sterling. And I just find that sort of works, but it's a pain in the ass to sort of have to change basses over mid-song. Got to unplug everything, and you're using up 15 seconds you don't have, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but it's like you go to whatever place you want to for the particular song, and there's going to be a couple of musicians in the audience that love what you're doing because you're changing that sound, and they'll like the darker sound, and then they may get some ideas from that you played.
Yeah, it happens occasionally. Yeah, especially in the city. When you play in the city, there's always 1 or 2 musicians in the audience. And I've only met a few Punishers over the years, not too many, I've got to say, thank God. But usually people are very nice. They just sort of want to find out what you're doing and get some sort of feedback about why you picked that instrument and why you're playing this over that, or you made that change there. Why did you do that? I'm quite happy to talk to people on that front. Only occasionally, if you're drunk, fuck off, to be honest with you, because you find that they're the worst punishers of all, Oh, I played a couple of instruments. Yeah, can you tell me, can I play it now? It's like, no, you can't. Go away. They can take you by surprise, some of them, because because I'm pretty friendly, I'll talk to people, I don't mind. But it's been years, I've got to say, and I'll be honest, it's been years since it's happened. But you'll be playing a show and then you'll notice someone standing in front of you and they give you the thumbs up and you go, hey, someone's appreciating what I do, what have you. You go and have a break, and then they all offer to buy you a drink. And that's the big sign that they're about to punish you, because then you're obligated to listen to their bullshit for however long it takes for you to drink your drink. So I always say, no, I'm fine. Thanks. I've got my beer here. I'm fine. Or I'll get something a bit later on. And then that can annoy them, because then they're like, oh, my dastardly plan doesn't work. So then they'll launch into, hey, you're using too much treble or too much bass or something. And you're like, okay, thanks for the feedback. No worries. Thank you. You obviously play yourself. No worries. All right, well, I've got to go. I go like, oh, yeah, but I know I can help you. And you're like, no, you can't help me. No, you can't. So let's just leave it. I remember one night, mate, I had this, I was playing 2015 the grand final, NRL grand final between the Broncos and the Cowboys. I had this woman behind me the entire set at the Victory in Brisbane, tapping me on the shoulder with a $50 note going, because she wanted to take my microphone and say something into the microphone. And as you know, you don't give the microphone to anybody. You actually take it with you during breaks in the busy places. This woman was drunk and she wanted the microphone. I don't know what she wanted to say, but she wanted to give me $50 so that she could have the microphone. And we, being musicians, we know that she's going to take the microphone and not give it back. That's what happens to drunk people. They claim ownership. And the fun and games of playing live when you're around people, and festivitous nights like NRL grand finals or Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, and the sense of entitlement that can creep in when people are drinking. But as I say, it's rare.
Yeah, I've done some I played in a few covers bands in the past, and I definitely know exactly what you're talking about, where people just have no sense of the amount of work that goes into a band that's practiced, midweek 3 times. They come to play a show on the weekend. They're taking time out of a busy life to play music and just do something they love, and they don't see how much effort goes into it. So, yeah, feel your pain, mate.
Mate, just back to the album then, lyrical themes. Did you cover anything or did you address anything specifically this time around?
The only specific thing that I think would be on the album would have been the last track. Obviously, being 3 years or more since we've last chatted, there's been a lot that's gone down. The album was originally started in 2019, so it was pre-pandemic. A pandemic goes down. Cam got married. Cam's now father. So the only theme that I could specifically point out is the last track, which is about his now wife and his baby boy, which is kind of a heartfelt tribute to them, and kind of the process in which he kind of fell in love and became a dad, and is this, I wouldn't say changed man, but he's a more complete person now that he has those two in his life. Mm-hmm. The rest of the album is, I would say, lyrically probably diverse. There's some stuff in there. There's some party jams in there. There's some introspective, darker moments. There's some, stuff where we question existence and, our place in the world. But I would say these themes are kind of based on the song and where the music took it, rather than specifically trying to drive out themes. I would say there's probably something in there for everybody. There's kind of, the harder nuts to crack, the emotional catharsis, the big anthemic songs, and then some kind of quieter moments where you kind of, questioning stuff like lockdowns and, what it is like to be alone, and, how you yearn for kind of the company of other people and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think that's kind of diverse.
Yeah, very diverse, man. Yeah, some of them seem very counter to how upbeat the album feels.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the overwhelming kind of, I would say it's far less dark than the last album. The last album was quite dark from the point of view of like the synth parts and the guitar stuff, and some of the lyrical content was quite going to places, somewhat confronting, but also, music is a space where we can kind of go to thoughts that we're kind of having and understand that other people are kind of having those thoughts, and it's okay to have those thoughts. And, or someone kind of speaks to us in a language that we understand, and then it might make it easier to kind of exist with those sorts of thoughts. And it's, it's normal to have them, and, no one should doubt themselves for having those thoughts. But I would say on this album, it goes to places that are still deep, but probably in a more accessible way, with maybe not 5-6 minute musical kind of journeys. So I think it's probably a little bit more accessible on this release.
Nice. Okay. I'll keep that in mind, actually, the more I listen to it. And the other thing, though, is that you're an album band. And albums, as you're no doubt aware, they're considered by many artists to be a legacy artifact. Yet here you are with another killer album. So why did you release an album of new music rather than the EPs that are so prevalent, and singles, I've got to say, that are all over Spotify?
Yeah, I have noticed that. The propensity for artists to kind of release singles, and you kind of look at that and you go, I wonder why they're doing that. And it's probably because they're able to promote a single and put more money behind it. Mm-hmm. But on this release, I guess on the last one, we kind of thought about, we'll drop a single. You've always got a release process, single, then you drop the album. On this release, we just thought we're just going to put it out there. People are, a lot of what we're doing in lockdown is we're consuming art because it's the one place we can go to, or a form of, media or music, we consume in lockdown because, it's kind of like an escape. So from this point of view, there wasn't any other notion of saying, we'll start with an EP or we'll start with an LP. We just kind of thought, well, we'll go away and record because we haven't recorded for like 3 years. We'll see what happens. If we come back with an EP, great. If we come back with an album, great. But thankfully, the creative chemistry that we hadn't subsided, and we kind of just picked up where we left off and kind of took it to another level. So I would say it came close to being a 9-track album, which for us was just a big thing, 10 tracks on an album. It's just like, you got to get to double figures. Mm-hmm. Otherwise we just wouldn't. Alice in Chains, I can't remember the name of the album. They dropped what was the 8-track album. I remember Jerry Cantrell and the other guys sitting in that, there's that interview or like a behind the scenes look where they're just like, let's just fucking release an 8-track album. I don't give a shit anymore. Let's just release it. And props to them for doing it because it takes balls. But we were just like, it's got to be 10 tracks. We've got to get it out there. And so I think probably with the last album, that was a big deal. But for this one, like, given that it's, we were mixing it on the outer edge of a pandemic, we're just coming out of lockdown. Incidentally, the name Fridays with Carol is because we spent 4 Fridays outside of lockdown at my place, at my home studio, and I've got a cat named Carol. Okay. And Carol really likes Cam, and Cam doesn't like cats. And so Cam's wife she's a presenter for the ABC. She's quite a gifted presenter, but also a very funny person. And she goes, you should name the album For Carol. And Cam's like, yeah, whatever. Ha, ha, ha. And then she's like, maybe you should name it Fridays with Carol because it was like the Fridays that you've been spending with Carol. Mm-hmm. And we laughed it off and thought, yeah, that's funny. But then after a while, it kind of stuck and we were like, well, it's a pretty good name. And we were coming up with other names and it didn't feel representative of kind of where the album was finished and where it got to. Mm-hmm. So it kind of just rolled off the tongue. But I guess I think we kind of like setting each other challenges and, stuff that we don't think we can meet. And it just feels like an accomplishment to release an album as opposed to an EP. So, yeah.
I'd agree. I think it reflects our ages too. We grew up in a time, you talk about Alice in Chains talking about albums. That's certainly the era that I grew up in as well. And EPs were considered stopgaps. They were things that bands released for tours, or record companies, I should say, released for tours. And they weren't, probably one of my favourite EPs is the Primus EP, Miscellaneous Debris, which I think the band themselves have forgotten about. But these days, I routinely get hit up to interview artists that have just released a single. I've got to tell you, and I say to them, look, we're not ready yet to have this conversation. There's not enough for me to understand what your musical philosophy is. Okay, and I'm not asking you questions about shit you released in 2017 or something. So I don't mind doing that. I mean, people want to hit me up and come on the show. That's fair enough. But have an album or at least a fairly meaty EP so as though we can actually dive into aspects of the album and we can talk about things. Because if it's just a single, which I understand is the way that things are done, but it just doesn't make for a decent conversation, I don't think, because we end up talking about other things outside of the music.
Yeah, maybe it's got something to also do with the era that we grew up in. Some of my favorite albums, Metallica, the Black Album, some of Cam's favorite, REM, Automatic for the People.
Good album.
These are great albums. Like these were, back in the day when musicians could only go to a studio and record. And so they probably just have this outpouring of stuff, something like Smashing Pumpkins and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, how many of those tracks got in the album, but how many of those didn't? You know, everybody culls from their albums. And so we ended up with 10, but we probably had about 18 in the mix. And then the other B-sides that are just garbage. So I guess it's probably the era we grew up in. We just got, you know, the kind of formula was always that the ultimate goal was to have an album and that you could be proud of, I guess.
Yeah, and it is. And look, albums are still the yardstick by which a musical legacy should be measured, truly, because singles are here today, gone tomorrow, and anybody can really release a single because you put your best ideas into one song. The challenge is spreading those great ideas out, to your point, over 10 songs or 18 songs that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And you made a really good point there about Melancholy, because I've long thought Melancholy should have been a single album. And especially when I listened to The Aeroplane Flies High, the B-sides box set or whatever it was, and listening to some of the metal numbers that Billy came up with on that one there, he could write a riff, man. Jesus, he was like Richie Blackmore or something. I mean, he could certainly play the guitar, but he had this thing about mixing in fairly antiquated electronic stuff. And I didn't like any of that. To be honest, I skipped over all of that shit. You know, XYU and the first two songs off the B-side, Bodies and Love is Suicide. Is that Bodies? Can't remember. But anyway, the songs I'm talking about, the first two songs off the B-side, killer metal rock numbers. And he sort of lacked a bit of, his ambition wasn't quite matched by his, I'm not going to say his talent, but quality control sometimes, because some of those songs that ended up on as B-sides that hardly anybody heard, mate, were probably some of the best songs of that era.
Yeah.
I can't even name the Pistachio Melody. It's got all the guitar outtakes and stuff on it.
Yeah. It's a wonder what their quality control process was, how much of, he's obviously the creative powerhouse in the band, and you know how they say there's always two, usually, in a band that are the creative drivers of their music. And I don't know if it was just Billy Corgan in that setup. Maybe it was Billy Corgan and James Earhart. I can't really remember.
I think it was Jimmy Chamberlain, the drummer. He and Jimmy used to work on the stuff together. Right. James is really like I don't know. I don't even know why he was in the band for the most part, because the songs that he contributed sounded like the Carpenters or some shit. Like they weren't rock numbers, and then I saw him in A Perfect Circle. I
wonder why he went to A Perfect Circle after that. Who knows?
Well, I saw you when he was in A Perfect Circle, and it was an odd match, but I think that's just Maynard Keenan trolling us all. He's got one of the best drummers of all time in rock music in Josh Freese, and he's got these other musicians around him who just seem like as though they're sort of there. And these are my opinions. You know how it is. We all have our own opinions on these things. But look, talking about music broadly, then, and in the 3 years or so, the 2 years or so that you had between the release of your previous album, Human Is, and this one here, were you influenced by anything that was out there? Any of the new music that you heard, or even old music you picked up?
Well, definitely a big influence on me, probably guitar playing, probably would have been War on Drugs. I mean, I think I've referenced in the past that Pink Floyd, David Gilmour was kind of the go-to. I was in love with his playing for a long time, but I didn't like the fact that he played a Fender Stratocaster, because I'm not really a Fender man. I'm a Gretsch man. Gretsch and Vox is my jam. And each to their own. Like, I think it's a very sweet sounding guitar, but it's just not for me. Definitely. I mean, there's kind of influences that go back. There's kind of some Bowie in there. There's clearly Tears for Fears. There's, even references to Spandau Ballet, which is kind of getting a bit glam in the rock era, or the 80s era. But I think it's definitely War on Drugs. There's a bit of Arcade Fire in there. I think it's a bit of everything. But I think for me it was War on Drugs. Cam's, really a big Tears for Fears fan. Loved that, but also the references to the duo of us two. Like, there's only two in our band, there's two in their band. They both contribute. But he's also a really big REM fan. And, I guess there's probably a tendency to focus on more of the old school music. We kind of go back and kind of rediscover albums from the past, because a lot of the music that's being released today, because of the accessibility of it, means that it doesn't kind of, capture your imagination like back in the day where you used to sit outside the record store or the CD store and line up for the album that you've been waiting for 2 years to come out. These days, it's more like an album gets released on Spotify and there's maybe not as much tangible stuff. Probably another influence would be Tame Impala. I smashed the Currents album. I think his newer release was an interesting release. I really liked it. He's clearly a creative powerhouse and an amazing musician and recording artist. And I think his performing's got a lot better as a band now. They're quite amazing live. Probably he'd be the first to admit that he probably doesn't have the greatest voice, but he definitely has that kind of Lennon pocket that he goes to. But yeah, I smashed Currents. Loved that album. And then the follow-up I think was quite good. And then probably it's just going towards like stuff like The Cure. Love The Cure. Some more poppy stuff in Christine and the Queens, which is a really nice place to go to experience some newer stuff. But you can't really go past the old classics like, what we're talking about, Metallica, Smashing Pumpkins. They're a good back pocket to draw into.
Yeah, I was talking to Bill Steer from Carcass about this. I asked him the same question that I've just asked yourself, and he said nothing new, but he said he's found stuff that was released 30 and 40 years ago that he's getting into now. So it might as well be new music. And that sort of hints at the fact that, look, I think there are some wonderful albums coming out these days. Yours is a good example of it. There's a lot of the stuff on the Nuclear Blast roster from an extreme and heavy metal perspective. I'm getting a lot of great albums. And there's even a band called Leviathan Project who released, instead of doing it on an album, they had an album's worth of material, but they've released 3 EPs just because of what's going on, I think, with the whole marketing side of things with Spotify and Apple Music, and just trying to sort of stagger the releases to give them that kick each time. But yeah, you're right. I think it's probably just the way our brains are wired, because we didn't grow up with iPhones and iPads, and the closest thing we got to that sort of thing was Sega and Nintendo and Atari. But we're wired just a little bit different in that we actually want to sit down with an album and absorb it like a meal in respect. It's not a snack. We actually want to digest it. And you talk about Pink Floyd. I'm going on a huge Roger Waters kick at the moment. And I'm starting to understand his genius, I've got to say. I've sort of overlooked it for a while, but now I think I understand that he was the guy. I do. I love the rest of the guys and what they contributed, David Gilmour and Nick Mason and the like. But I think without Roger, that band doesn't have that darkness, that dark melancholy, the world is fucked and what am I sort of thing that I think Pink Floyd is really, that's to me, that's when I think of Pink Floyd. That's where I'm going to. I'm not really going to the Learning to Fly songs, off Delicate Sound of Thunder or whatever that album was called.
Well, The Wall is one of my favourite albums of all time, and it is, I think Roger Waters wrote pretty much 80% of it. I saw it at O2 Arena in London.
Oh, wow.
Probably about 10 years ago. Amazing stage show, amazing performer. The Wall live is one of my favourite, concerts that I had on DVD and Smash back in the day. The theatricality of it, the kind of the subtext, the music, the musicians in it, musicians like Van Morrison singing on those tracks, Sinead O'Connor, all these amazing artists coming together, and he kind of, coordinated all that and made this amazing concert. But, it's because the album, it's still to this day stands the test of time. A lot of people, would know Another Brick in the Wall, but Comfortably Numb. But some of my most favourite songs on that album aren't there. big well-known ones like Run Like Hell, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just an amazingly complex piece of music, like the classic, you know, the rock opera. You know, the Who did it as well, but I think for me, The Wall it's the really great one, and kind of maybe synonymous with like British musicians and maybe being able to go to these wacky places like I don't know, the Beatles' White Album just goes to these otherworldly places where you can just go and get lost in these albums of just, you know, how much meaning they have in it, but also just musically they're just so diverse.
Yeah, funny you mentioned the Beatles too. I've been going on a big John Lennon kick in terms of not his music, because I still struggle with the Beatles, I'll be frank. It might just be the way that they're recorded or something. I know the tunes are great, and God knows I've played enough of them in the covers band, but I've been going on a late night binge of reading all about John Lennon, about who he was as a person, especially when Yoko Ono was added to the mix, because that couple are about the most batshit mental couple in the history of rock music. He was so obsessive about her that he used to go into the toilet when she was in there. So because he couldn't bear to be away from her. I mean, I think people think it was the opposite way around. I think he had the obsession from the sounds of things. I'm not saying she cast a spell over him, but you know, she had some sort of a fix over him that he didn't seem to be able to control himself. And just the way he treated his first son, Julian, like shit, effectively. Very odd guy.
This is the window you get into musicians' lives of just like obsessive geniuses, of some people that are so musically gifted, but so like a little bit bonkers. Like one of my favorite docos of all time is the Metallica documentary, Some Kind of Monster, because it gave this window, and you got to admire them for like, you know, revealing themselves in that level of detail. That was before it was cool. That was like they were breaking down barriers. Like, even though probably a lot of people would say everything after Load has been pretty, or even after the Black Album has been a bit.
Yeah.
And, you know, I got the Black Album on vinyl, and it just from the start, it just hammers through the speakers. But like, you got to admire them for like revealing all of that. And obviously being a bit of a recording nerd, I loved the fact that the producing aspect of everything, you know, I love Sound City, that doco about, you know, the sound studio in, where was it? Where like Stevie Nicks and, or Fleetwood Mac came together at that studio and recorded their first album. I think they recorded Tusk there. And it was kind of the beginning of the band. And then, you know, like bands like REO Speedwagon and like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers recorded most of their albums there. So anything that gives you like a window into musicians' lives and kind of their personalities and like how much conflict there all is. And then when there's conflict, there becomes this genius. And so I can totally get what you're saying about Lennon being a bit bonkers. Like when it kind of reveals what was sitting beneath the surface, it's like sometimes you're like, oh shit, they're complex beings.
Yeah, man, there's this video. I don't encourage you to check it out. Check it out for voyeurism only, but it's of Yoko in 2010 or 11. It's a relatively recent one, of course, being man. But she's in some art gallery in New York doing that weird thing that she does. Like, it's like, I don't even know what you call it. I call it yelling, but I'm sure there's some art behind it somewhere. But read the comments, the YouTube user comments underneath it. You know, me and my wife just, one night we were reading them for about an hour. Like, we were spitting our cups of tea out. We were just laughing so much because one person's art is another person's ridiculousness. And from an artistic perspective, she's fucking ridiculous. Like, it's just what one of the users said something about, you know, because she's Yoko, that's called art. But if I did it, it'd be locked up and put in a mental institution or something like that. And that's the thing about art. It's so subjective that some people get called geniuses. Remember when like Pearl Jam lost their shit around No Code? And people were saying, oh, this is their artistic phase. It's like, no, sorry, they've just run out of a lot of good ideas. You know?
Yeah, it's all in the ear of the listener with music as well. It's like it's in your interpretation. You totally get what you're saying. It's all relative.
Man, Mate, I'll wrap things up, but before we do, have you got physical copy of this album here? Like if someone wants vinyl or a CD version, how do they get a hold of it?
We'll probably do that based on demand if it's there, but essentially it's all on streaming platforms, so Spotify, Apple Music, Google Music, it's all on the streaming platforms. That's probably the best way, so digitally. And then based on demand, we could print to vinyl if, everybody's keen for it. So they can just hit us up if they want vinyl.
Look, I know most of my listeners lean into hard rock, heavy metal, extreme metal, but there's always a place for this sort of music in a person who loved that style of music, catalogue, their collection. I think especially these days, it doesn't take much to just check a band out that you ordinarily wouldn't sort of check out. So for people listening, In Capital will always be my pick from a left of centre perspective. If you're used to listening to fairly heavy shit and you want a bit of a break, take a listen. Because, look, I think what you guys do, Nick, you take some of the best of all of that stuff I mentioned up top. You know, we talked about the 80s, new wave sort of sounding stuff, some of that funk, disco, groove, French house. It's all there. But, like, to prove the point, we've had a great conversation about some of the greatest rock artists of all time. You're coming at it from a rock perspective. So rock and metal fans, I think, can actually sink their teeth into what you guys do and can get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think though there is, there are pop elements to all the tracks. I think it goes from it can go, the start off, it'll be synth pop, then it'll go to an alternative place. Then there'll be guitar solo parts. There's darkness in there. There's lightness in there. I feel like the songwriting will communicate, if people are into songwriting and kind of vocalists, lyricists, and interpreting lyrics and kind of diving deep into the songs, the deeper songs, the cathartic songs, I think they can get a lot there. So I think there should be something for everyone. And I think, give it a listen and let us know what you think.
Yeah, hit you up on socials. Here's the other thing, tip for the listener. It's great driving music. I have to listen to a lot of music because of the amount of podcasts that I'm doing, and I do put most of it on in the car, but barely any of it stays on, I've got to say, because a lot of metal doesn't work in the car over your iPhone speakers or my Bluetooth speakers through my Jeep, but yours work beautifully, man. So wonderfully recorded, well produced. The songwriting is there, to your point. There's the future is bright for you guys, man, so please keep on doing what you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andy. Really appreciate that.
So there you have it, my chat with Nick Jenkin from In Capital. If you liked it, there are many more just like it over at scarsandguitars.com, well over 550. Almost 600, in fact. If you could like, subscribe and share, I'd appreciate that too. And if you found me on socials, please do leave a nice comment. Nice comments always help. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith and I'm the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast series. I appreciate that you've tuned in, and until next time, it is a very goodbye for now.